folks. Welcome to episode 9 of the podcast, Defining Talent. Always looking for startup superheroes. And I can't wait to get started today. I've got an incredible guest, Casey Crosby, and we've known each other for a little while now. And following every bit of your career is something that I always walk away with a new insight or learning. So I can't wait to hear how this goes today. But we're going to talk a lot about team building, a lot about different industries and how to create teams that do really hard things that have never been done before and do them really well. So awesome. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, to kick things off, we'll do it how we always do. Eager to hear, when did you start thinking about talent and team building as part of your career?
I started my career at Johnson & Johnson, and talent and team building is like the crux of what they have developed within their ecosystem of organizations. So it was something that was just kind of always on my mind. And I didn't realize until I had left there how it's not on every company's mind quite as much as it is at J&J. They're not so thoughtful. So yeah, it really started there. And I think I saw very quickly Johnson & Johnson would do a lot of acquisitions. And it was really fascinating to see how companies would kind of meld into their ecosystem and, what that teamwork and team building, what impacts it would have, and how they thoughtfully manage their own challenges.
Yeah, I find that it's so often it's something we take for granted, right? Mm-hmm. We just assume that we'll just post these jobs and then the right people will just make all of our dreams come true, and realizing it's a lot more nuanced than that and takes a pretty concerted, consistent approach kind of forever. Yeah. Unfortunately, There's no magic button here.
Yeah, absolutely.
For better or for worse, I guess. Great. And I've always been really intrigued to your background in hospitality. Like, you were building very different teams there than you are in your current work, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to me a little bit about like your backgrounds kind of up through what you're focused on right now?
Yeah, my background's pretty varied. So I started my career at Johnson & Johnson working in operations, mostly rolling out new software and kind of change initiatives in manufacturing plants and warehouses. I worked in a tech startup in the telecom space after that. I went to business school, and after business school, I was in real estate private equity for a number of years, actually buying and renovating large commercial buildings in the office space. And then I left that to run a resort in the Caribbean and kind of do the same sort of renovation and improvement plan. Very different set of teams in each of those organizations, but also there is a lot more similarities than people would think.
Yeah, do you want to highlight some of those pieces that you've seen kind of as threads throughout, kind of like regardless, like industry agnostic?
Yeah, I think industry agnostic, most people who are working want to do a good job. And actually, sometimes with talent, it's much more about like, the skill set that people are coming in with, but also like how trainable and like willing to learn somebody is. And actually, like, to me, that's a higher correlation with someone doing really well in their job than maybe having 5 more years of experience. And I think regardless of the type of job, whether it be investment type work or working in a warehouse, some people have that mentality. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, and then I think specifically in, the startup industry that you and I are both very part of, we're doing things for the most part that have never been done before.
Yeah.
So we actually cannot hire somebody that has 5 years of experience doing this function because it hasn't existed, which I always think is a really interesting piece to bring. And I find that understanding that reality is one thing, but it's scary. Now we're hiring someone who hasn't had that proven track record of doing this function before. And that it's always hard, right? And that's kind of why, that was the impetus actually of starting this show, was helping really, I love that talk track of like, what are we actually hiring for? Because it can't just be, they wrote this code for so long. They're actually going to do something brand new, which is so wild. And something that I'm also really intrigued kind of on your side around is, I'd love to learn a little bit more about this problem that you're solving at Pronto, and then we'll kind of get into like some of the specific needs there.
Yeah. So Pronto is a software that makes the application and ongoing requirements process easier for affordable housing. So most people don't know this, but the largest provider of affordable housing is actually the IRS via the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And similar to the IRS with your regular taxes, they require this to be done every single year, basically forever that you're living in that building. The process is similar to your taxes, but a little more intense, actually. And right now it's all paper based. So we're kind of like TurboTax for the affordable housing space, really helping put this online and help meet residents where they're at, which is generally being able to do it on their own time at home, at work, after work.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And then I think of like, yeah, the TurboTax world. There's so many competitors in that space of taking something that the IRS has done for a long time, yep, and making it really accessible for the normal person who doesn't know how to read the nuances of the tax code, where it's a little bit all over the place because it's easier to pass tax code regulation than it is to do anything else, which is why affordable housing is kind of worked into here. And then, I think about how there's very few entrants, I would imagine, in the space that you're in. And my gut tells me that it's because a lot of the folks that have the tech savvy or that have had the opportunities to build, more tech focused problems maybe haven't had that lived experience. But can you talk to me a little bit about how did you zero in on this need and kind of really identifying it?
Yeah, so my co-founder, Christine, actually found the problem. She was working at a developer here in New York City. They were building a building in Manhattan, a very, nice neighborhood, great high rents. Everyone's excited to live in the neighborhood. They had 21 apartments in that building. It took her 18 months to lease those. And, there were probably 40,000 people in the lottery. So it was not a supply problem, right, of people. This was, a processing problem. But she didn't realize that until she started digging in and figuring out, like, wait, there are so many people who want these apartments. These are so cheap. What's going on here? And then once you dive in, you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of confusion. Similar to your taxes, right? Like if you were to do your taxes by yourself without TurboTax, there's a reason people go to school for that separately. It's pretty complicated. And this is actually really similar.
So there was just available empty apartments waiting on this backlog?
There are in most cities, there are some available apartments. I'd be shocked if there weren't waiting to be processed.
Fascinating. Well, now you're working on this problem that, like, again, most folks that have been part of this, like, more white collar tech industry, I'm thinking like a little more old school, like fairly affluent set of folks, which is what makes up most of the tech industry. And that's something that, my team is actively working to change when we think about who are the historically excluded candidate groups that we can bring in to our conversations so that we make sure that the tech we build and the innovation we build actually supports all folks instead of, exacerbating inequity. But I'd love to hear a little bit more how you're thinking about that when you're building out your team, Casey. Like, this is non-traditional tech paths. How have you considered that around your team and then culture?
Yeah, we haven't really hired a ton of traditional tech folks. I think part of it is, we are a for-profit company, but we are mission driven, and it's really important to us to improve this process for everyone involved. We do really feel like this is another tax on the poor. It's like one more thing they have to do, often taking off of work and all that. So our most important pieces when we're looking for new hires is really like, are you passionate about solving this problem? Because it is a hard problem and it's a layered, complex problem. And it's the kind that you can't just like casually do. You've got to like really feel passionate about solving it. And then also, are you willing to learn and grow? Because no one has really done this before. So we're always learning. We're constantly learning. We're in 20 states now, and every time we enter a new state, there's a ramp up period, a learning. And someone who's willing to do that and learn gracefully, in the sense that like they're willing to put their ego aside, is bar none the most important characteristics for us.
That's amazing. Yeah. So we're looking for folks who are passionate about this problem, who love to learn, and do it gracefully, kind of putting aside their ego. What else have you found are some qualities that are like really, that you've really identified as like the folks that really stand out on your team?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like a scrappiness for some of our team members that doesn't always necessarily come through. unless you're like kind of being really thoughtful about how you ask questions during interviews, it can be tough to get at. And that scrappiness is, what really helps people propel through those challenges of like, oh God, what do we do here? Like nobody has Wi-Fi access. Like what's going to happen? And figuring out those problems in a creative fashion, because there's a solution for all these things. It just takes time and creativity.
Yeah, and I find so often in a hiring process, so many of us are like, let's do a homework project, or we're all scared to hire, right? Because we need to hire well, because our entire business depends on it. Okay. And so much of what we've kind of like distilled down to, we want to know how they think, we want to know how they problem solve, and we want to kind of get a sense of like, what is that work collaboration gonna feel like? And I think that's where, digging into how candidates have solved problems in the past, how have they made decisions when there's a trade-off, saying like, you had two bad choices, what'd you go with and why? Are some really interesting, can be like really insightful. Do you have any other questions or ways that you've kind of found that you've been able to like intuit some of this scrappiness?
Yeah, we make most people do a case study, and the case study is something that, most of our team has never done something like that specific case study before. And that's intentional because we do want to see how they think through something that they don't know. And also like how they communicate that thought process and work through it with somebody else. And then if you give them another piece of information as you're talking through it, what do they do with that information on the fly? How do they handle that and really just work through it together? And we found that that's a really good proxy for a lot of things, right? Because maybe you don't know the formula because you've never seen it before, but you're very organized and you highlight, hey, I have all of this laid out, but I couldn't figure out this one, and this is why. Those small details actually make a big difference in how you work in a team with others.
Yeah, that's great. Another test I really enjoy is kind of like this translation test, or like if, someone's applying to your industry and this is not a familiar industry with them, which is okay. Not like you said, none of this has been done before. I'm always curious to hear if somebody learns new technology or new terms, industry terms on initial calls, are they then shifting and swapping their own vocabulary to use those terms later? So like, for instance, if that's someone who's like, oh, and the customer, and we talk about them as a client or a patient or a partner, right? Are they shifting that language to make sure that they're matching what we're saying, is showing me that like they're really fast at learning, also at like building that relationship. But I think of, how do we get into a new state? Someone's going to be able to adapt to whatever that process is. And that adaptability is another one that I've found.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Do you have any more learnings around kind of like, great, so now you've built a team, you're running at a pace of a startup, you're building towards profitability because you want to be stable, but you're also hiring folks that haven't necessarily been in that dynamic, fast-paced, scrappy environment all together with this tech piece. Can you talk a little bit to what that like learning curve has been like? How are you thinking about building your culture to make sure everyone's still thriving there? Like, I guess like assumptions.
Yeah, so it's true. I mean, and we, both my co-founder and I operate very much like a very fast startup.
I can attest to that. Casey is not moving slow at anything that she's doing, which is great.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, some of it is modeled behavior of, like, oh, what is expected? I, would expect you to get these number of properties done per day, and like actually laying out clear metrics and then showing how others on the team model that behavior. There are some like, intangible things too. Like when someone says to, if you're said, oh, give that person a call, and they don't call them for, a day or something. That's not moving with a sense of urgency. So we're pretty upfront about, like, even during the interview process, we talk a lot about detail orientation and sense of urgency. We think everyone thinks they have those things, but actually there's a bell curve, right? Just like anything else. And we try to suss out a little bit of like what urgency means to somebody. And sometimes actually going through that case study, you can kind of figure that out too. And then it's just coaching them to say like, okay, you're doing really great here. We need you to speed up here. And what can I want you to think about how we can help you and support you to do that. Because different people need different things,
Yeah, I've been really thinking of actually that term urgency a lot recently and been writing about it, that folks continually are lauding my team for being urgent. And when I think of the word urgency, I'm thinking like those memes of like scattered papers everywhere where we're kind of just like rustling and trying to move as fast as possible. And I realized like, that's not how I feel at all.
Yeah.
I would think that our team is at our most balanced right now, but we are moving really quickly and delivering really fast. And I kind of had to think about like, what is urgency to us is actually like empathy. We want to move fast because we actually see the pain in our clients and see that the candidates need to have things moving. And then also we learned that like proactivity, right? We're actually just holding to a normal timeline. Our timeline is accelerated, but because we're being proactive instead of reactive, we found that that's a big part of it. But yeah, it's been interesting, like interrogating what the definition of urgency. So I'm fascinated to maybe add that into my questions that I ask in the future of like, what does that mean to you? What do you think like, did something on an urgent timeline? How did that feel? And what's your definition of that?
We often phrase urgency. So Christine and I, we have similar sort of origin stories and backgrounds in many ways, and for me in particular, for example, my brother had passed away many years ago, and we both focus a lot on time. And that's something that actually is an ethos of Pronto too, because we think that people, both at the property owner side and at the renters or residents, are spending too much time on something that's just paperwork, right? It's like, you deserve all of those hours back. You should not have to do all of this. I mean, we're in technology world. This isn't 1950. And that sense of urgency does come down to time, because the more urgent you can be, the more time you have for other things. And I think that's, if you didn't come from a background where that was sort of the ethos, or you didn't work at a company where it was like that, it is an adjustment to be like, oh, wait, this is not just about like me being more productive in my day. It is also like me having time to, go to the gym after work and all these other things I want to do.
Yeah. And then how have you as a leader, like been able to play that out to your business, right? I'm kind of curious, is that modeling? Is that kind of just like reminding folks that time comes in and out of the office?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely talk about time a lot. We talk about how much time the residents are spending on their, on the app. How much time it takes us to get things set up. But we also talk about personal time too. I mean, both Christine and I are very clear with the team that like, we're all adults. I'm not going to manage your time, and, you will have things to do, but it's your job to manage that. And you know what? Maybe some days you got to leave at 3. That's just it for the day. But you work a little longer the next day, and that's totally okay. I think, as long as leaders, you have clear expected deliverables, you can also model that behavior for them too, but encourage it as it comes up. We actually recently just moved to a new office that we're really excited about. And they have like a little meditation nap room, which some people on our team are taking advantage of, which is great, because actually that 20-minute nap, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, totally. I just have read the book Rest is Resistance, and it has me deep on the nap train. And she talks so much in this book about how like our body and mind need a few minutes sometimes just to take all the little mini connections we've made in our days and weeks and months. We need to let those come together. That's where innovation comes from.
Yeah. And I think sometimes when there's like that afternoon slump, people like, they just want to grab another coffee or something. And it's like, you just take 10 minutes, it'll go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm finding that, if I get my heart rate moving, if I like do a spin class, or I'm trying to get back into doing some more of that, and I come back with so much more energy, but I almost always don't go to the spin class because I'm too tired. Yeah. It's just so funny that like expending energy gets me in a better spot. Well, I want to round this out to learn a little bit from you, Casey. Like, what makes you a great teammate?
It's a good question. I would love for somebody else to answer that for me, to be honest. But I think for me, I don't have an ego. I don't care if it's my idea or somebody else's idea. I don't care if you think my idea is bad or you want to poke holes into it. I don't approach that. Like, I'm very, very goal and end focused, in the sense that, however we need to get there, we get there together. I also think that I am pretty scrappy myself, and able to kind of creatively problem solve through a variety of things. I mean, I enjoy doing that. And it's one of the reasons that I like being in the startup environment. And I try not to take myself too seriously. Sometimes I can get really serious, but I do also like to be a little more relaxed.
Nice. Yeah, it's got to be that balance for sure. And then I'm sure that you've made some super fans. If anyone who's listening and viewing this, I know that they're going to want to follow you and join your story. So how can we stay in touch?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Casey Crosby, also Pronto Housing, LinkedIn, and my co-founder, Christine Wendell. You can follow her as well. And we're always posting things about affordable housing in the US and, what that actually means and how it's changing and evolving and the latest and greatest of what's going on.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think of as an employer, like childcare, this whole like infrastructure childcare crisis has become really real to me. We been to some summits recently on it and realizing like, oh, this impacts my ability to hire. This impacts the ability of my team to find care. Like
Yeah,
there literally isn't care. And then I think that goes hand in hand as I'm hearing you say this with housing.
that's right. It does.
Right? If people can't afford to live, which I live in Portland, Oregon, we're seeing that, as housing rates have doubled
Yeah.
in a pretty short period of years, that's a hard one. So yeah, I'm looking at like my workforce and realizing the work you're doing is impacting me as a business leader. So thanks for really driving in this mission-driven place and really appreciate your time today, Casey. Thanks to everybody who listened, and tune in next time for some more insights around team building and really digging deep to figure out what are those core qualities that we want when we're building a team. If you're trying to join the Pronto team, sounds like you got to be really scrappy, really passionate, and be able to be a fast learner and problem solver. Thanks, folks. Bye, Casey.
Thanks. Bye.
And I'll just end the recording here.